Good evening, Dr. Kyriakides. I'm taking a stab at how to pronounce your name, and I'm hoping that that's correct. This week's assignment offered the opportunity to speak about the different kinds of social power, some of which I have been able to work within that structure. Most I have not. I think I've mentioned in my papers that I spoke and knew more about the alpha dog, but the really aggressive alpha dog. There are 5 forms of power that are within a structural organizational type. The reason that Raven and French actually narrowed it down to these 5 is because they wanted to be able to be sure that they could observe the kinds of powers, that they could see it integrated into the social network of the organization itself, and that people could integrate it into their own behavior if that was a set of social powers that were used within the company. So the 5 are coercive, referent, reward, legitimate, and expert power. I also did some reading, and although Raven and French published their first works in 1959, Raven actually did some more work later on in the career that added an informational power. I will say that the kind of power that I've been subjected to as an employee has either been coercive or a very strong alpha dog kind of structure, which I'm going to speak about in a few minutes. So as we go through these, I, as I said, did see a article or 2 on 6, some on 7 types of social power, but I'm going to stick with 5 and maybe add informational power because it seems important to me. So coercive power is pretty obvious as to what the name is. It's ruling by coercion. It's not trying to get your employees behind you and wanting to do what you like for them to. It actually, you are very coercive in how you ask them to do things. And then what it does is create resentment. People are doing it because they want their job. They're not doing it because they're really on board or they believe in you or anything like that as a leader. They're doing it because they don't have any choice. This is a very short-term kind of power structure or social power that doesn't work for very long. And so that, I mean, coercive is pretty obvious what it is. I actually have worked under coercive power, and basically you just did what you were told and didn't really offer any expertise or any odd kind of different kinds of information, even though you had it and the leaders didn't, but it didn't really seem to matter. The second type I'm going to speak about is reward power, and that's having the true authority and the ability to give rewards when your employees comply with your wishes or when others comply with your wishes. And I'm doing this in an employer-employee kind of basis from that perspective. It doesn't always work, and so if you move to a different setting, it may not work so well. And what I have learned from looking at intrinsic and extrinsic rewards, there are different things that mean have some importance to some employees and not to the others. So it's hard to get a boss who wants to give you dinners out, or if you laugh at their jokes, you get a reward. When you may not think they're funny and they don't hold any value for you. So if you're going to use reward power, then you really have to look at what intrinsically is beneficial to an employee, what they think is important, and what extrinsically you can reward them with. I think the interesting thing that I've known for a long time is that it's not all about money, and that although people certainly work for a living, they work in order to get money in order to support themselves and their families, that there's many other rewards that can be really helpful to an employee: recognition, celebration of their accomplishments, the ability to take an extra day off, the ability to go to a class that they wanted to do, the ability, like a couple of the companies that are so popular right now, like Google, for instance, where they get a 20% of their time to work on projects that really are meaningful to them. That's a different kind of power. Referent power. Referent power is very interesting, and this is really important when you've got role models and mentors. What it is when you have someone who wants to be just like you, and you're their model, you're their mentor, and you teach them and you take the time to teach them, but you can teach them the way you want them to perform and the way you want them to actually grant what it is that you're asking of them. So you can use referent power, you can teach them what the social norms of your particular organization are, but you want to make sure that as opposed to being a mentor of really strong aggressive behavior that can go off the rails, you want to mentor them into the kind of employee that you want to have. Legitimate power is power that truly is part of your role and your position in the company, and you have sometimes otherwise known as authority. It's the positional authority. So, for example, as a clinical director of a group of 43 people in the last company that I worked in, I was able to really set a strategy for the year. This is what we wanted to accomplish. This is what I wanted people to know. And for instance, I set up a journal club, and it was mandatory that people present an article periodically when we had our biweekly staff meetings. So that was legitimate power that I had. I wanted people to keep up with the data. I knew that just if I signed it and asked them to read it, they may not do that. So I actually asked them to present an article, and that was within my personal job-related authority. Expert power is something that means an awful lot to me, but very few leaders that I have worked with are secure enough in their positions that they will let anybody else exhibit their expert power, unless, of course, it's their own. And for those individuals who think they know everything, expert power is something that they really like to exhibit. This part of this is credentials. Part of it is all the awards they've gotten, the know-how. They end up deferring to a greater power, a greater area of knowledge. It sometimes works well and it sometimes doesn't. I think it's limited to their areas of expertise. If you have a boss who has expert power, he's going to have, or she's going to have, power in one particular area. People cannot have power in every area. And so I think that that's the limitation of expert power. And the last one, which is not the 5 that Raven and French noted in the beginning, but Raven actually did some more study about later on, is a transitory type of power. Once you share your information, you transfer or transition that informational power to somebody else. And in a lot of the reading I did said, then your power was gone. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think a good leader has a continual influx of information, and I think that they can have informational power and they choose or not choose to share it with their employees. But once you do, then it's a transient power that other people you give to other power, and I think people, and I think that that's something that works very well for leaders. The next thing I'm going to talk about, and I'm just going to do this extemporaneously, is the alpha dog personality. I did a lot of reading about this. I actually worked in a company where we had several very high-level positions. One gentleman had just sold a company for many millions of dollars. He was still a youngish kind of guy, and I'm not quite sure why he was still working, but he was. And he brought with him and ultimately transferred in many of his colleagues from the previous company that he had sold, and removed many of the people who had dedicated an awful lot of time to the company where we worked. And so people, as new positions were made and filled, everybody knew that they would be coming from the previous company that they owned. And the problem with this is that there weren't room for two, and so many of the people who had put in a lot of time, not even myself so much, but put in a lot of time, had lost their jobs. So the interesting part of this is he turned it into different